question module that you can use to ask any questions. There will be a dedicated Q&A at the end of the webinar. So if you wanted to ask questions at any time, we'll ensure that they're answered during the Q&A portion of this webinar. If you're having any technical difficulties, please feel free to use the chat module and someone from our team will get back to you. And then finally, if anyone's on social media, you could follow us on Facebook or on LinkedIn using the following tags there. Our host today, Katie Stewart, is a consultant with a long history within the hospitality industry. She works with hotels and hotel groups providing sales, technology, and marketing expertise. Now, without much further ado, I'd like to introduce you to Katie Stewart.
Thank you so much, Joseph. Hello, everyone. This is Katie. I am very excited to be here and talking with you today. We will be covering quite a few slides, and as mentioned, there's going to be some question and answering at the end, so I certainly hope that we can engage in some dialogue towards the end. I have been in the hotel industry actually for about 20 plus years, if I add it all together, and have had the opportunity to work in roles on operations, sales, at the property level, at the above property level, and then also on the flip side of working with the technology companies that provide tools for hotels to really run their sales and operations smoothly. So I'm very excited about that. Was very fortunate to have a lot of opportunity to work with many different brands, many different sizes, as well as a lot of fantastic people along the way. So I think that says enough about me. Let's go ahead and jump right in. If you want to flip the slide, Joseph. So we're going to be talking about creating an effective sales process and really talking about your unique experiences. Let's go ahead and flip the slide. When you talk about like, what does that mean? I think that everyone on some level feels like they're the same. And then everyone also kind of feels like they're unique and they're different. Definitely throughout this whole, conversation that we're having, I think it's important to really start to think of yourselves as individuals, but yet working with teams and really getting to know your market. So let's go ahead and flip the slide. I think there's a lot of opportunity for us to talk about kind of where you start with the prospect and you kind of move through. And I know that you guys are all reading these slides and looking at them with me, so I'm not going to go specifically through them. I think most of us are very familiar with that introduction, finding a lead, then you sit down, you have the conversations, and then you close the deal, you deliver. What is the pre, post, and during conversation look like? So we're going to get into that a little bit later, and how does it affect you and how does it affect your teams? Next slide. So these are the 10 components, and I really like this process because I do think it's important, even though, and we're all coming from the same, kind of from the same background, from the same information in regards to what are those steps that make an effective sales process? What are those steps that your team can focus on that keeps you mindful and really following and being able to check back during the process of a sale? Maybe there's a hiccup, maybe there's a barrier, going back and saying, okay, like, what happened maybe in the qualifying stage, looking back at when was the meeting, maybe the meeting was over the phone, but maybe we should have pushed harder for an in-person meeting. But I think this is a critical for anyone, no matter how long you've been in the sales business or selling, to conscientiously make sure that you're going from prospecting, you're qualifying, you're making those correct connections, you're meeting the customer's needs, and so on. So I think that's very important. I think a lot of people try to skip steps, and sometimes the sale kind of goes a little too fast, but really those earlier qualifying and connections and really understanding the needs are just critical. So go ahead and flip the slide. So when you're talking about prospecting, I think that the sales process tactics for revenue growth, your marketing, what are the prospecting, to define your target audience, and to really attract and using social media. These are a lot of buzzwords. There are a lot of things that are out there that are affecting and making some of us feel a little bit anxious as we're going through the sales process. Am I looking at the right audience? Am I looking at the right social media? What is my data telling me? And we have data coming from us from all different perspectives. We have our brands. Some of us are independents or boutique, and so we have our own internal data. And I think it's important to stay mindful of when you sat down with your team, when you sat down with your revenue managers, and if you don't have a revenue manager, you know, you have other people that are great influencers, whether they're external or internal, of general managers, your operations teams, you know, going and staying together and staying cognizant and mindful of looking at what it actually is that you're trying to achieve on a revenue growth throughout the year. So, you know, talking about the sales tactics, talking about your target audiences, you're not really going to know that until you as a team sit down and you've said, you know, what have we done in the past? What are we doing currently? And what's our projected goals? You know, what are we trying to achieve? And, you know, we have a lot of influencers, that we have a lot of people, and we have a lot of things that kind of change that on a kind of an ongoing fluid basis. But if you have that overall like solid plan, you know, maybe you're up in December, maybe you're, you know, really slow in July. So really having that mapped out and really being mindful of sticking to it as you're going through the process of the sales cycle is important too. We can skip this or flip the slide. Sorry, Joseph. Again, you know, what is that ideal customer profile? I think the ideal customer profile comes in when you are truly understanding what your projected revenue and what your goals are. And you should have stretch goals for meeting your budgets and exceeding those budgets. And the ideal customer profile then is going to kind of come into play as you're starting to map that out, as you're looking at it and saying, do we need group foundational business? Do we need the corporate business? Do we need the transient business? And I think it's really important, you know, there's low-hanging fruit and there's this great opportunity to have really foundational corporate business and we feel good about it, but it also takes a lot of the little tiny other transient, other businesses that are coming through to really exceed that revenue growth. I think that the teams that can balance, you know, all of this is, you know, is important. And then as you're starting to say, okay, where are the gaps that we're trying to fill? How are we trying to put heads in bed? What we're doing, then these come into play. You know, as you're going through the sales cycle, who are the decision makers? Who are the roles and job titles that you want to deal with? And then through, as you're understanding that, then you can go out to the social media. Then you can start building and utilizing other resources that make sense. You can flip the slide. So the tactics of hotel sales teams using online channels, again, I think that there's so much opportunity for us. You know, LinkedIn is such an incredibly strong resource for everyone, and it's available to everyone. I think that people are very open to communication. I think that there's, you know, a lot of individuals that you can look at. Definitely, I would be looking at your competitors. What are your competitors doing? What are your, you know, what is the director of sales down the road doing, and who are they linked in with, and who are, you know, what groups are they, you know, participating in? I think that's important. And, you know, how are you managing those RFP tracking sources, and how are you taking those people through that sales process as well? We can go ahead and skip to the next one. In the very beginning, when you're going through those qualifications, I think it's important as a team to really understand what those questions are. I think it's important to set the stage for the customer that you're looking for when you go back to your ICP and you're kind of saying, okay, who really fits into building our revenue growth and who we want in the hotel. And sometimes you don't have much control over that. Maybe you have to take a group at a lower rate, or maybe over a time period that you weren't, ready for. But those qualifying questions and really understanding that group, seeing if there's some flexibility with individuals that are looking at, really having those solid, strong questions, I think is very important. Next slide. As we all know, budget, who's making the decisions, what is the need, what's the time scale. I think that these are all, very important. I think as you're going through the kind of the initial sales cycle that we were showing you, keeping these mindful, keeping these forward, in your thoughts, checking back and making sure that you're staying on target with these 4 key areas is very important. I think as your team also progresses together, being able to work together and work as an individual on a qualifying, but then talking to a team member and maybe talking about a budget, does this fit, does this not, is really important. Because I think it also affects, you have to look at the entire maybe year that's ahead of you, or that quarter that you're really trying to. So maybe someone that you wouldn't consider before, you would consider now based on what's happening at the hotel. And then being very cognizant of really taking care of that customer. Can you fit that need during that time? We can go ahead and skip to the next one. Relationship building is such an important, conversation piece for me with all of the sales teams that I've worked with, and anyone who, has taught me about sales. And it's hard to understand, what does that mean, especially in today's world. I think that when I connect with a client, I talk to them about what's their form of, communication. How is it best for me to foster and develop that relationship, so that I can bring them in not only as a prospective client, but as a long-term sustainable client that I can utilize not just for bookings, but for referrals, for feedback. That's really, really important, really staying mindful of that, really staying true to, no matter who the customer is, no matter who you're talking to, you're trying to build a relationship, you're trying to build that positive outcome from them. We can go to the next one. And, talking about building trust within the sales process is such an important thing as you're going from the client telling you what is the need. You're qualifying that client, you're talking about their needs, you're talking about what your hotel can provide them, you're personalizing things, and you're very, you're being sensitive to their budget, you're being sensitive to their timeline, all of those things. And I think the best way that I've looked at it is, how are you creating a win-win for both of you? I think it's really important that it's okay to have a win. It's okay to go into a sales and go into a pitch saying, I want to win too. I want to have, a high revenue group. I want to have something, someone that's coming into the hotel that's meeting my budget. And then you also want to win for the client. So keeping in mind, how do you make that, win-win situation where you are being personal, you are taking care of their needs, you're exceeding those needs. And then you also have to consider the entire team. Your sales team is not just the salespeople that are dedicated for sales. It includes the general manager, includes the front desk person, it includes the housekeeping and how they're taking care of the guests. So it's also being conscientious of, if a customer is asking for something that may be a hardship on the housekeeping, how are you going to manage that? How are you going to maybe help them, or maybe be honest with the client and say, I'm not sure, because you want to make sure you're setting yourself up for success and you're building that trust where they know you're going to come to them and give them that opportunity. So we can go to the next slide. So, I think that, we touched on the needs and requirements. I'm going to kind of skip over this slide a little bit. We can go on to the next one. Again, what is that needs analysis? I think that as you guys kind of read through this on your own a little bit, it is important to, ask those open-minded questions. I think this is a try, you fail, you take notes, you get feedback, and you try again. You're constantly trying to uncover and get with the client on what their actual needs are. I think this is a skill that's built over time, doing your homework. There's so much information out there. No one should go into a meeting not knowing about the person or the company or maybe even past hotels that they've stayed with. We can skip to the next one. And then, how do you effectively meet and present for your client? What is did you talk about what was their communication style? Did you get to the decision maker? And if you're not with the decision maker, are you providing materials that the decision maker will like? Are you setting that person who's going to then go and be your spokesperson to look like a rock star selling your hotel to that decision maker? What are those videos? What are the effective presentation decks that you've put together? And does it need to be a deck? Does it need to be a video? So really understanding that and giving yourselves the opportunity. Again, I think, go for it, make a video, do some different ideas and try it, get feedback, and then try it again. I think being able to do on-site tours obviously is critical and really enhances how the guest gets to experience your hotel. And really can make or break when you're dealing with a lot of rooms in one market or very similar hotels. Your relationship is going to make or break that particular presentation and whether that client trusts you and says, okay, I'm going to choose this hotel. So, spending some time getting the client feedback as to how they would like to be presented to is an okay question to ask. I don't think that we should assume, what's most effective for them. Next slide. Again, we've talked about this. I think that, understanding what their channel, what is going to benefit the hotel, how you're benefiting them, really being cognizant of staying on point to what you're talking to that customer about is really important, and what that customer is looking at from you. Being very mindful of their time and being very open, not really saying much sometimes is the best way to handle a meeting or a presentation. And then of course, always follow up. Next slide. This is always a really big one that a lot of people, and I think that handling objections is learned. It's a skill that's crafted over time, and it's something that you can come up with obvious objections that your client's going to have, and kind of how are you going to be the authority of your property and manage those objections. I think it's important to keep in mind that it's okay. Sometimes a client isn't a fit, so be kind. Move on. But if the objections, it's okay to talk to the client and be very, I think, aggressive at this point a little bit and assertive in saying, look, I really want your business. I think there's a lot of people out there that kind of hear an objection and they just, and then it kind of shuts them down. But don't let that end the conversation, even if it's a conversation of what you can learn, and asking them, so, why are you not comfortable with this particular rate? If that that's a rate that's solid, that's going to put you up for success, challenging them as well to provide you some feedback is helpful. And maybe they're concerned about, like a breakfast or something else that you haven't even, and that's going to open up that conversation for you to say, oh, well, let's talk about that. We can maybe, coordinate F&B. So I think being open to pushing back and really understanding and digging in and not letting the conversation end is really important. Next slide. So here's some very common, Joseph, I don't know if you're providing or sharing this, or if people are just maybe doing a screenshot of it, but I like this where it kind of sets out very common, and you should always have very strong responses to a timing issue, to a budget issue, you know, and having some solutions that your hotel team has come up with to say, this is how we're going to overcome that. This is how we as a team are going to manage that. If you have event space, working within that event space and being willing to say, hey, you had this event space, you know, for this particular group, maybe we can move them because we have this different, you know, having those opportunities to change the dialogue with the client is the most important thing when you come into, you know, common objectives. Next slide. So the proposals, again, are kind of a scary place for some people if you haven't gone through the other, you know, and really nailed the other sales processes beforehand. I feel like when you get to the proposal and kind of rate agreements, it should be, again, a confidence in handing it to your client, knowing that you're winning for them. And if you're not winning for them, if you're hesitant, then before even doing the proposal or rate agreement, go back to your sales cycle, go back to those conversations and make sure that you're really nailing the proposal and the rate that you're confident in. And then, you know, if you end up not getting the business, that's okay. Take it back to the team. What did you learn? There's always something to learn. And but I think getting to the proposal and rate agreement, you should know how the proposal is going to be, you know, presented. Are there, you know, is it kind of like an RFP process where someone else is, but can you send a LinkedIn note to the person that you know is going to be receiving the proposal and just say, hey, you know, are there exterior things that you can do around proposal and rate agreements? But one of the, I think the biggest things is being confident about it. Next slide. So I'm not going to touch on the setting corporate rate deals. I think corporate business for most individuals, there's a lot of data out there, and there's a lot, and it's a pretty open book when it comes to what corporations are looking for. I think that there is, you know, the prospective clients that are coming in, they're ready to tell you, like, this is what we need and this is how. And so it's going to go back to specifically that relationship that you have with them. You know, how are you developing that? What are some additional services and options that you can maybe give them that they haven't thought about? But, you know, meeting their core needs and meeting, you know, sometimes they're just like, hey, this is our, you know, this is our rate kind of spectrum, you know, can you fit that? And if you can't, then how are you making it up to them? How are you, you know, providing them with additional services, maybe savings on a local dining experience, maybe coupons, you know, there's different things. I know that's kind of a lame, you know, coupon thing, but I think that there's different ways to navigate the corporate rate. And I think that that's kind of set out and kind of set in stone. And there's not a lot of negotiation there. Next. So again, you know, if you've done your homework, if you've followed that sales process, even on a small business, I think every time you can follow the sales process, it gives you that confidence. It has, you know, it gives you that ability to make sure that you've qualified, you've talked about the needs, you've looked at your timeline. Does this business fit in with what you're projected? Is it going to help you meet your budget? Is it going to help you make your revenue goals? And you know, what's the future of the business? So I think once you get to it, this is where it's kind of like, for me, I feel like this is why we're all in sales, because this is the best part of being, you know, in the moment and then closing the deal. It's fantastic. So I think that we can talk about it if you guys have specific questions, you know, at the end. We can kind of get a little bit more nitty gritty. But if you've done your homework and you've done it and you're confident about the proposal, then I think you know, closing the deal is the very validating part and very rewarding part that will come. Next. Again, you know, being authentic, I think, is the most important thing. People can, you know, tell when you're iffy or you're not confident or you haven't really, you know, so again, making sure that you're very confident in the fact that you've put together the best deal possible, and that you have, explain to the client. A lot of people get into this urgency of creating that timeline, so number 3, where you're, oh, I've got this discount, I want to close this business. And sometimes you have to go there. But hopefully, you through your prospecting, through, really being clear and clarifying with your teams the business that you're going after, that you're not just utilizing timelines and specific discounts, but you're able to draw the business and prospect for that particular, customer that meets your needs, and move on from there. But I think being authentic is kind of the best thing that, that is on this particular slide, and being real to who you are, being real to what you are offering in the community and what you're providing. Next. Delivering on the experience is great, and I think I spoke about that a little bit earlier, where it's not just you and your sales team, it's the entire property, it's the management company, it's your brand, it's everything that is providing that opportunity to give the experiences. And again, being authentic is really important. I had this one salesperson that I worked with, and they were fantastic. They really actually taught me so much, in the sense of, when they are delivering the experience, they're making sure that their customer is going to come back to them on a regular basis, that they are going to now be that customer subject matter expert of hotels and venues and local things to do, for that particular. And if you make a mistake, you make a mistake. How are you handling that? That's giving you the opportunity to get in front of the client again. But making sure that you aren't just talking about the experience with your sales team, but you're sharing that experience and expectation with your entire property and management. Next. I think that, thank goodness for technology, has really provided us an extremely easy way to, regardless of whether you're a one-man show or you have an entire sales team, staying in contact with people is so important. Reaching out to them and getting feedback, I think, is extremely critical. I love written notes. I think that that's a rarity. I think it's important to kind of get in front of the client that way. And being able to get feedback, I think, is critical when, even if you think that it went well, you're like, oh, this is great, like there was nothing wrong with that. You don't want to just move on to your next thing. Make sure that you're going back and getting feedback for the whole team. Next. Upselling, reselling, I think we all have that, and we're mindful of that. Specifically asking, I think, is really important. Building the rapport with the client, making sure that you've built that relationship, and then sitting down and saying, hey, what other opportunities do we have to do business? What other opportunities do we have for me to do business within your industry? Because maybe there's, sponsors, vendors, different, sub companies, sub organizations that you could be working with, and that would be, an opportunity for you to get referrals, or to understand if it was a good piece of business, how do you get more of that? Next. I think I just kind of talked about that a little bit. You guys can really quickly kind of read through these benefits. What are the benefits for your sales team? What are the benefits for your clients? I think, having that opportunity to work with a consistent client. I had this one salesperson, and he was fantastic, and he had such a great, he would call it like, you want to have a deep bench for your team, right? And he had such great relationships with his clients that he'd call them and be like, hey, I'm 10,000 short of my revenue goals, help me out, throw me a bone. What are you doing? What do you have going on? What do you know that's going on in the market? And he had those kind of relationships with his clients. That was so fantastic. So a lot of my teams, I tell them, have that authentic win-win relationship with your clients, have that as your goal, and you will get benefits. You'll get benefits on, for you, and you get benefits for your client. Next slide. So I think we can all agree that, if you can stay on an effective sales process, if you can focus on enhancing your guest experiences, if you can give them, all of the needs that they then it will benefit you. It's increased revenue. I think it's much easier to run a full hotel than a hotel that's maybe, at 30, 40%. And it helps you build that, forecasting revenue out, where it gives you the confidence to really start to look at the different options that you have, the different opportunities, and start to scale them. What's the top prospect, what's the middle, and what's the tiered third, and then as a team deciding what to go out, go after that. Next. So I think Joseph is going to take over at this point, and it was really fun talking with you all today. I hope that we have some questions.
Yeah, thank you so much, Katie. If anyone in the audience has any questions now, you can type them into the question module on the GoToWebinar panel, and then I'll be reading them out directly to Katie. Katie, I have one question for you from our audience. When it comes to prospecting in the sales process, do you suggest a broad approach like emailing, or being more targeted, such as going after a specific company or industry?
Yeah, so I think that prospecting can benefit you in many different ways. I think that prospecting needs to be done on a daily basis. You should be always looking for, and casting that broader net of trying to figure out what's happening in your market is really, is very important. But if you've been able to develop your specific profile of the customer that you're going after, then, really targeted, on that particular industry or that person or that group or that association is really important. One aspect of prospecting can also be just looking at your competitors and seeing what they're doing, and the nuances that are happening in your community. But I think that setting yourself up in the different tools that you have to plan out and target consistent messages to a particular individual, association, group, or audience that will fill your hotel and put you on the right track of that revenue growth would be very targeted and critical.
Great. I have another question here. When you work with hotel sales teams, what are some common challenges you see across the board when it comes to implementing and managing a good sales process?
I think that sometimes we skip some steps. I think that's maybe some of the biggest challenges where you kind of maybe when you're going through the qualifying and needs, maybe there was another person that you didn't realize was part of the actual deciding team, on their side, and that person had a need that just didn't get fit in, that just didn't get included. Then all of a sudden you're at the, closing the deal, and they're like, whoa, wait a minute. So I think the challenge is to really stay mindful and cognizant of the information that you're gathering and making sure that it's true to the goal of closing that particular business. Does that answer the question, maybe?
Yeah. I have one more question here. Do you have any tips in regards to reaching out to potential bookers via LinkedIn? How do you stand out amongst what may be a sea of cold sales messages? And that's from Sarah.
Sure. I love LinkedIn. I think it's fantastic. I think that there's a lot of opportunity. I think being honest is the best way to say, I'm a director of sales, or I'm a sales manager, or I'm above property, and I'm really interested in learning how we can win your business. What can we do? What can we learn? How can we start that conversation with you? I think can really kind of set you apart from saying, hey, we want your business or whatever, but how can you learn? How can we work together? How can we open up this conversation and this dialogue? And I think another, Instagram, these other social media outlets are such a wealth of information where you can go out and really jump into and participate in conversations. I think that the Instagram stickers are incredible. They give you this, a really neat opportunity to kind of put some images of yourself out there that show the guests kind of what the experiences are that you're going to have at your hotel. And so I think not being afraid to jump into those conversations as well is important.
Great, thank you. If anybody has any final questions, you can type them into the question module now. We'll give everybody just a little bit more time to ask any final questions. Okay, I don't think there's any other questions. If you do have any questions, you can always email us at marketing@eventtemple.com. I'd like to thank Katie, our awesome host today, for going through some really great insights into the sales process for hotels. And I'd like to thank everyone for attending. This webinar has been recorded, and you will be getting a copy of the recording to your email shortly. And if you're interested in a demo of Event Temple, you can always email us at bob@eventtemple.com, and he'll be happy to walk you through a demo of our platform. I'd like to thank everyone today again for attending, and we hope to see you in our next webinar. Thank you, everyone.